Welcome back to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. The train horn screamed through the valley. Robert Walker didn't move. He was on his knees on the cold steel rails, both hands locked around the leg of a trapped dog, the ground shaking beneath him like the earth itself was coming apart. The light of the oncoming train was growing, a white blazing eye cutting through the gray evening air, and still he pulled. His jaw was clenched, his arms burned, and somewhere behind him, a tiny puppy was crying the most heartbreaking cry he had ever heard in his 63 years of living. He had survived 2 deployments. He had carried men off battlefields. He had held hands that went cold before the medics arrived. But in that single moment, kneeling on those tracks, Robert Walker made a promise to himself that he would not let this end in tragedy. Not today. Not again. It had started, like most quiet things in Robert's life, with a walk. After 22 years in the United States Army, Robert had come home to a world that no longer quite fit him. The town of Mill Haven, Virginia was peaceful enough. Rolling hills, old oak trees, a gas station that doubled as a post office. But peace for Robert had always come with a strange kind of weight. The silence after war is not the same as ordinary silence. It presses against you. It reminds you of everything you carried and everything you left behind. He lived alone in a small house at the edge of town. His sister called every Sunday. His neighbor Harold sometimes waved from across the fence. But the only one who truly stayed close, the only one who never asked Robert to explain himself or to be more than he was Titan. Titan was a 6-year-old German shepherd with a broad chest, intelligent amber eyes, and a loyalty so steady and so deep that it sometimes made Robert's chest ache. The dog had come into his life 3 years ago through a veteran assistance program, and from the very first night, when Titan had quietly rested his heavy head on Robert's lap during a storm, the two had become inseparable. They walked every evening along the gravel road that curved behind town, past the old water tower, past the rusted fence posts, and along the edge of the railway tracks that cut through the valley. It was their routine. It was their peace. That Thursday evening in late November, the air had turned sharp and cold. The sky was the color of pewter, and the last light of the afternoon was fading fast behind the tree line. Robert walked with his hands tucked into the pockets of his old canvas jacket, his breath rising in small clouds. Titan walked beside him, calm and steady as always, his paws crunching softly on the gravel. They had walked perhaps half a mile when Titan stopped. Not gradually, not slowly, he simply stopped, every muscle in his body going rigid, his ears lifting straight, his golden eyes locked on something in the bushes to their right. Robert stopped too. He had learned long ago to trust that instinct. "What is it, boy?" he said quietly. Titan didn't look at him. He kept his gaze fixed ahead, a low sound building in his chest. Then they both heard it. Small, fragile, desperate, a cry. It was the kind of sound that reaches past your ears and finds something deeper, something instinctive and old. Before Robert could take a single step, the bushes shook and a small puppy burst out onto the gravel path. He was tiny, maybe 8 weeks old, with matted golden fur and enormous dark eyes filled with a terror no creature that small should ever have to carry. He was shaking from the cold or from fear or from both. He ran straight to Robert. He grabbed the edge of Robert's jacket with his tiny teeth and pulled. "Hey, easy there, buddy," said Robert, bending down. "Easy." But the puppy would not stop. He pulled and cried and then released the jacket and ran a few steps back toward the railway tracks, then turned and looked at Robert again, barking with everything he had in his little body, then back to Robert, then back toward the tracks, over and over, like a child screaming for a grown-up to follow. Titan made his decision before Robert did. The big German shepherd growled once, low and certain, and then he ran. Robert followed without thinking. His old knees complained on the uneven ground, but he moved fast, the soldier in him waking up from wherever it had been sleeping. The puppy raced ahead of them both, weaving through the tall grass at the edge of the tracks, crying the whole way. Titan reached the railway first. His bark changed immediately, louder, sharper, frantic in a way Robert had never heard from him before. Robert pushed through the last of the brush and stepped onto the gravel bed of the railway line. And then he saw her. A medium-sized dog, sandy brown with a white chest, was lying across the steel rail. Her left front leg was wedged deep between the rail and a broken metal tie plate, twisted at an angle that made Robert's stomach turn. She had clearly been struggling for some time. Her fur was torn. Her paw was bleeding. She was whimpering in a low, exhausted voice, her dark eyes moving from her puppy to the two strangers who had just appeared, full of both fear and something that looked very much like desperate hope. The puppy rushed to her side and pressed his small body against her face, licking her frantically, crying without stopping. Robert crouched beside the trapped leg and assessed it the way he had once assessed everything in the field, quickly, calmly, without the luxury of panic. The rail had her locked tight, the plate had shifted, and the leg was wedged in at an awkward angle. He tried to move it with his hands. It didn't give. He repositioned, tried again, harder. Nothing. And then he heard it. A sound from far down the tracks, low at first, almost like distant thunder. Then a horn, one long hollow blast echoing across the valley. Robert turned his head slowly. Far down the straight line of the tracks, maybe a mile out, a single white headlight was moving, steadily, quickly. The freight train. It ran through Millhaven every Thursday evening at 6:15. Robert knew this. He had heard it from his porch 100 times, that low rumble rolling through the walls of his house like a familiar voice. He had never once thought about what it would look like from the tracks themselves. It looked like a wall of light and steel rushing toward him at 70 miles an hour. The ground beneath his boots had already begun to tremble. The puppy cried louder. The mother dog struggled and whimpered. Titan sprinted several yards down the track toward the oncoming train, barking with furious, useless courage, as if he could stop it by sheer force of will. Robert planted his boot against the base of the rail. He gripped the trapped leg with both hands as carefully as he could around the wound, and he pulled. The metal held. He pulled again, adjusting the angle, trying to work the leg the way it had gone in rather than simply forcing it outward. His arms burned, his back screamed, his hands were shaking, from cold, from effort, from the vibration of the tracks that was now traveling up through his knees and into his chest. The horn blasted again, much closer. The light filled the curve of the valley. For just a moment, one single flashing moment, Robert was somewhere else. He was in a field, in the dark, and a man beside him was hurt, and the sound in his ears was not a train, but something far worse, and someone was screaming at him to leave, to fall back, to save himself. And he had stayed then, too. He had stayed, and he had pulled, and he had not let go. He clenched his jaw so hard his teeth ached. "Not today," he said, to the dog, to himself, to every ghost that had followed him home from those long years away. "I am not losing another life today." He braced both feet against the rail. He straightened his back. He used his legs, the way you lift when your arms have already given everything they have. The train was close enough now that the sound was no longer a sound. It was a physical force, a roaring weight pressing against the air itself. The puppy was crying. Titan was barking. The mother dog looked up at Robert with those exhausted, trusting eyes. And then, with a scrape of metal and a rush of released pressure, the leg came free. Robert did not pause. He scooped the injured dog up against his chest, wrapped both arms around her, and threw himself sideways off the tracks with everything he had left. They landed hard in the cold grass at the edge of the gravel bed. A split second later, the freight train exploded past them. The force of it pressed against Robert's back like a giant hand. The noise was total. It swallowed the world whole for 5 long seconds. The grass flattened. The cold air turned hot and metallic. And then it was gone. The silence that followed was so complete that Robert could hear his own heartbeat. He lay still for a moment, the injured dog against his chest, his face turned up toward the darkening sky. He could feel her breathing, quick and shallow but steady. He could feel her heart beating against his arm. He was breathing too. They both were. The puppy appeared first, scrambling over the grass, tumbling in his tiny urgency to reach his mother. He pressed himself against her and cried and licked her face with the unguarded, total love that only the very young and the very devoted can offer. The mother dog lifted her head and licked him back once, slowly, as if to say she was still there. She was still there. Titan came next, returning from wherever his brave and foolish charge down the tracks had taken him. He circled the small group once, then lowered his head and pressed his nose gently against the puppy's side, a gesture so soft and so certain that Robert had to look away for a moment.
He sat up slowly. Every part of him ached. His hands were scraped and bleeding. His back would make him pay for this tomorrow and the day after that. He looked at the small, trembling family in front of him, the injured mother resting now, the tiny puppy curled impossibly close against her, Titan standing guard with quiet dignity. Something shifted in Robert's chest. It was not dramatic. It did not arrive with a great wave of emotion or a sudden clarity of thought. It was more like a door somewhere deep inside him that had been shut for a very long time, slowly, quietly opening just enough to let the light in. He reached out and placed his hand gently on the mother dog's head. She looked up at him. Then, with great effort and great tenderness, she lifted her chin and rested it on his knee. And she licked his hand. Robert sat there on the cold ground beside the railway tracks in the last gray light of a November evening, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, his eyes went wet. "Well," he said finally, his voice low and rough and full of something he didn't quite have a word for. He looked at Titan, then at the puppy, then at the gentle, exhausted dog resting against him. "Looks like you and I just got ourselves some new partners, Titan." Titan looked at him with those calm, amber eyes and said nothing, which was exactly the right response. That night, Robert carried the mother dog home, wrapped in his canvas jacket, while the puppy walked beside Titan through the dark, stumbling on small legs but never falling too far behind. Robert set her gently near the fireplace and drove 40 minutes to the emergency veterinary clinic, where they cleaned her wound, wrapped her leg, and told him she would heal just fine with rest and care. He drove home with the puppy asleep in the passenger seat. When he walked back through his front door, he stood in the entrance of his small house for a moment and simply listened. The fire crackled. The mother dog breathed slowly near its. The puppy stirred and made a small, contented sound. Titan settled beside him with a quiet exhale. His house, for the first time in years, felt full, not of noise, not of chaos, but of something alive, something breathing and warm and real. Robert sat down in his chair by the fire. He did not turn on the television. He did not reach for anything. He simply sat and let the warmth of that small, improbable family settle around him like something he had not known he was still waiting for. He thought about that tiny puppy running out of the bushes, frightened and small and completely alone, and how he had not hesitated, had not turned to find help, had not done anything except run toward the one person he believed could save the thing he loved most. Robert understood that kind of faith. He had carried it himself once, a long time ago, and somewhere along the way, between the wars and the years and the long silences, he had forgotten that he was still worthy of it. The puppy climbed up onto the chair beside him, turned 3 small circles, and curled against his leg with a sigh that seemed far too large for such a tiny creature. Robert placed his hand gently on the puppy's back and closed his eyes. Outside, the wind moved through the valley. Somewhere far away, another train passed through the night, its horn low and distant, and no longer frightening at all. Inside, there was only warmth, and that was enough. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that courage comes in quiet forms, and that love finds us when we least expect it, please consider subscribing to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. Every story we tell is a reminder that the smallest cry for help can open the biggest doors of the heart. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and stay with us, because the best stories are the ones that never stop giving. Silent Paws and Brave Hearts, where loyalty never walks alone. The educational and human value of this story. This story carries meaning that reaches far beyond its drama. At its heart, it is a portrait of a veteran quietly struggling with the invisible wounds that so many men and women bring home from military service. The isolation, the silence, the difficulty of returning to a world that has moved on without them. Robert's story gives a face and a voice to that experience in a way that is gentle, dignified, and deeply human. It shows children and adults alike that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is a 63-year-old man on cold railroad tracks, shaking and tired, refusing to let go, not because it is easy, but because it is right. It also illustrates the profound emotional role that animals play in human healing. Research has long confirmed that companion animals, particularly dogs, reduce anxiety, ease depression, and restore a sense of purpose in people who are struggling. Titan and the rescued dogs in this story are not decoration, they are medicine. They are the bridge Robert needed back to his own heart. For younger viewers, the story of the puppy teaches something timeless, that when someone you love is in danger, you do not give up. You cry if you must, you pull if you can, and you trust that someone, somewhere, will hear you and come. And for all of us, the story offers this quiet truth, that healing rarely arrives the way we expect it. Sometimes it bursts out of the bushes on 4 small legs, soaking wet and terrified, and drags you by the sleeve toward the very thing that will save you.